Hey, welcome back, podcast friends. And in today's episode, I feel like I really need to be talking to you about this because everybody's talking about these new drugs that are out here to help keep you feeling full. First, I really want you to think about how long we have been here on the earth. From the time we were first put here on earth till now, our bodies have always known how to feel full on its own. Also, and I've said this in past podcasts, do you realize that human beings are the only animals on the planet that have to be told what to eat? And this is ridiculous. All other animals know exactly what to eat. And we always knew what to eat all the way up until our dietary guidelines came out in 77. Now, man started making man made food, telling us that's what we're supposed to eat. And that's when all of our foods, this all started back in 1977. And look, in the late 1970s, early 80s is when all of our disease states just started skyrocketing. Okay. Our obesity rates, our diabetes rates, our hypertension, our cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, skin conditions, polycystic ovarian syndrome. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of all the conditions that have started occurring to us since we started eating this man-made food. And now everybody's telling us that this is what we're supposed to continue to eat because when we get sick from this, now we have the drug companies telling us that they have a pill to cure our every ill. And they're actually making people believe all this stuff. When if we just really think about what's going on, we didn't have all these diseases till we started eating the man-made food, and we never had all these drugs until we started eating all this man-made food. And now we have lots of diseases. So I want to explain to you exactly what it is about our bodies when we eat, why that keeps us feeling full. Okay. It all depends on what you eat. You do not need a drug. We've never needed a drug. If you do need a drug just for about a month or so to carry you over from your carbohydrate addiction over into switching into actual proper nutrition, then that might be okay. But you definitely do not want to stay on these drugs forever. They are there are so many adverse effects. So let me just go right into it first. And I've talked about this in my past podcast. Why do we get hungry? And I actually did a whole podcast. Why do we eat? Okay, that's podcast number 90. So I'm going to just skim through our nutrition very quickly because I explained it more in podcast episode 90. But the reason we eat is because the reason we get hungry, the reason our body makes us feel hungry is because it needs nutrients. There are certain things that our body has to have in order to grow, heal, thrive, and survive. And these things are things that our body needs, but they do not make them. Our body doesn't make them. We have to get it from the food we eat. So that's why God's given us this hormonal balance that makes us, when we are lower on our nutrients, it makes us hungry. So we get these nutrients. The nutrients that we need amino acids. Okay. Amino acids are the basic building blocks of protein. Okay. And again, I go over this, so I'm not going to hit it real hard. But anytime you eat protein, okay, all protein gets broken down in the basic building block of amino acids. Of all the amino acids, of all the proteins in all the plants and all the animals combined, there's only 20 different amino acids. But from those 20 different amino acids, our body can make up to 20,000 different proteins. And some of these are like 27,000 amino acids long. So we have to eat protein. Now, whether you eat animal or plant, well, the fact are we are animals. So plants do have some of the amino acids that we need, but meat has all the amino acids that we need. So even if you eat plants, one, you're going to have to eat a lot of it in order to be able to get the amount of protein you need of the amino acids, but you're also going to have to supplement some amino acids that animals have that plants don't. That's not my fight. Okay. Go ahead. If you want to eat plants, if you want to eat real fruits or real vegetables, that's fine. Just don't do very much, and definitely don't make that your whole meal. Your main meal should be meat. Okay. And this is why I'm telling you, because the meat, when you eat that, that is animal protein. So that gives us all the amino acids we need. We also need fatty acids, and that means we have to eat fat. Fat is actually extremely healthy for us. Fat and cholesterol are vital to our survival. It's not the bad, evil things that the drug companies and food companies are telling you. Fat is extremely vital. And of the fat, again, that gets broken down to the basic building blocks of fatty acids. There are two different essential amino fat or different fatty acids that are essential, omega-6 and omega-3. They're essential because our bodies do not make them. We have to get it from the food we eat. And I forgot on the protein, the amino acids. Remember, I said of all the protein in animals and plants, there's only 20 different amino acids, these little building blocks. Of those 29 of them are essential, meaning our bodies don't make them. We have to eat them. So you have to eat meat for the amino acids that you need. You have to eat fat and cholesterol so you can get all the fatty acids you need. You also need vitamins, you need minerals, and you need water. If you give your body those things and sunlight also, but as far as nutrition, when you give your body all the proteins for the amino acids, all the fat and cholesterol for your fatty acids, essential fatty acids, minerals and vitamins and water, you will give your body everything you need. And when you do this, this actually makes you feel full also, because that's why you get hungry. Your body's needing nutrients. So once you give it nutrients, then the body won't be hungry anymore. But it goes deeper than that. So what I want to do is I'm going to talk about the digestive tract, and we're just going to kind of stay inside the digestive tract through this whole podcast. We'll go out a little bit, but the digestive tract means from your mouth to your anus. That is one long tube from your mouth to your anus. But a lot of things happen from the time you put your food in your mouth until it comes out at the end. Okay, so let's break this down. First, when your body needs nutrients, it makes you hungry. So when you eat, the first thing you do, you put food in your mouth. So let's just talk about meat right now. Let's just say we're having a big, fatty, marbled ribeye steak. Okay. So now you put that big old ribeye steak, you put that in your mouth and you start chewing it. And that's the first part of digestion. You're chewing all this meat, and think of how thick that is. So it takes a lot of chewing, a lot of breaking down. And picture it like a big block of ice on one side, and then having that same amount of ice on another side, but it's crushed ice. Which one of those are going to melt quicker? Well, the crushed ice is going to melt quicker because there's a lot more surface area, so it can melt. Same thing with food. When you have this big old steak, you chew it and chew it and chew it to break that up so you have more surface area. So when you swallow it, it gets down the stomach, and the stomach has a stomach acid that will sit there and start breaking this down into its components of amino acids and fatty acids. So first you chew it, and you tend to chew it a lot more because if you're chewing like a salad, it doesn't take you very long to chew. Meat, it takes a lot because there's a lot of nutrition there. That's why it's called nutrient dense. So once you swallow that, when you eat a steak, that gets in your stomach, and now the stomach acid is going to start working on that steak and on that fat that's in that. And it takes a long time to break this down. So this may stay in your stomach for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, just sitting there and letting this acid break down this meat and this fat. So that's good. So that keeps you feeling full just with having it in your stomach. But over those 2 to 4 hours, that's going to slowly release, and it's going to go down into your intestines. So your mouth, it goes down to your stomach empties into your small intestine. As soon as it gets in your small intestine, your pancreas releases what's called digestive enzymes. It releases protease, which is an enzyme to break down protein, and it releases lipase, which is a enzyme that breaks down lipids, which is fat and cholesterol. And then there's also going to be amylase, which is the enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. Okay, so we'll talk about carbohydrates later. So right now we're only talking about meat. So now it goes in the first part of your intestine. Your pancreas produces the protease and the lipase, and it breaks that down. But as it starts breaking this down in your small intestine, it's still in your small intestine, this food starts going all the way through your intestine. And as this fat and as this meat starts going through your intestines, but now it's going to be also in the form of amino acids and fatty acids because your body's breaking this down the whole time. As it goes all the way through your small intestines, these amino acids and these fatty acids stimulate two hormones. One is cholecystokinin and the other one is peptide YY. Both of these hormones are located all throughout your small intestine and even in the upper part of your the first part of your large intestine. These two hormones, cholecystokinin and peptide YY, are stimulated by the presence of amino acids and fatty acids in your intestinal tract. When you stimulate cholecystokinin and peptide YY, those hormones, they go up to the medial hypothalamus in the brain and tell your brain, I'm not hungry, don't eat anymore. So when you eat meat and fat, it stays in your stomach for 2 to 4 hours. Then as a release, it goes all the way to through your intestines, and then that lasts another 24 to 48 hours as it's going through your intestine, constantly stimulating your body to this cholecystokinin and peptide YY. It's constantly stimulating it, these hormones, to tell your body, I'm not hungry. So you stay full for a very long period of time. And some people can go days without eating. And my wife and I both have done this. We've gone days without eating and we don't get hungry because we had a good fatty meat as our last meal before we started doing all the things that we needed to do. The other thing that happens, okay, after this is, one, you're not hungry anymore because it stays in your stomach for a long time. Two, you're also not hungry for very long, for the next 24, 48 hours, really, because it's constantly stimulating these hormones. So you're giving your body all the things it needs, and your body's keeping you feeling full. And then also you need to make sure you're drinking plenty of water as well. But one other thing that our God gave us to keep us feeling full is when we do eat and our fat cells get full, our fat cells actually release another hormone called leptin. Okay, leptin is released. That's a hormone that's released from full fat cells. When it's released, that also goes up to the medial hypothalamus in the brain and tells your brain, I'm not hungry, don't eat anymore. So there's all these different ways that our body keeping us feel full. Okay. This is so important. We're getting all the nutrients and we're staying full for long periods of time. Now, that's what happens when you eat meat and fat. Now let's look at what happens when you eat carbs. Okay. Remember, we said protein gets broken down the basic building block of amino acids, and there are 9 essential amino acids, meaning you have to eat protein in order to get these essential amino acids, because your body doesn't make them. You have to get them from the outside. When you eat fat, it gets broken down to fatty acids. There are 2 essential fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6. This means our body doesn't make them. We have to get it from the food we eat. So we have to eat meat. We have to eat fat. Okay. Carbohydrates. When carbohydrates broken down, when carbohydrates break down, they break down to the basic building block of glucose. So anytime you eat a carbohydrate, all carbohydrates mean anything that comes from a plant. If it did not come from an animal, it came from a plant. All plants have the basic building block of glucose. So anytime you eat any plants, you are putting glucose in your mouth. It depends on what kind of plants you eat as far as how high your blood glucose goes and how much insulin your body's producing, because insulin gets secreted according to the amount of glucose in your blood. A little bit with protein. So protein will make your insulin levels go up a little bit. Food doesn't affect your insulin levels at all. And carbohydrates make your blood glucose go up very high and make your insulin levels go up very high. And as I've talked about in all my other podcasts, that is the problem with all the diseases that we have now, is keeping our insulin levels high for too long, getting insulin resistance, and putting inflammation into our bodies. Okay. So that's what happens now. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about a carbohydrate. One, you never, ever, ever have to put a carbohydrate in your mouth and you'll be perfectly fine, perfectly healthy. Okay. If you do put a carbohydrate in your mouth, make sure that it's a carbohydrate, a God-made carbohydrate, a real fruit, a real vegetable, the whole fruit and the whole vegetable with the fiber and phytonutrients and everything else. No labels, single ingredient. There's no label that tells you all the chemicals that they had to put in that food. Okay, that's the kind of carbohydrates. If you want a carbohydrate, that's the kind you need to have. So now let's take the carbohydrates. Let's see what this does. And just to tell you up front, carbohydrates have nothing that helps keep you satisfied when you eat carbohydrates. And actually, you're going to see it actually makes you more hungry. So first, remember we talked about when you ate a great big ribeye steak, you put that in your mouth chewed that up. Okay. That's how it does with that. But when you put carbohydrates in your mouth, you do the same thing. You put the carbohydrates in your mouth and you start chewing that up. The difference is, remember that we said there was protease that broke down protein, lipase that breaks down lipids or the fat, and there's amylase that breaks down carbohydrates. In the saliva, you have amylase there also. So not only is it coming from the pancreas as soon as the food goes from the stomach into the small intestine, but you also have amylase in the mouth. So carbohydrate digestion actually starts in the mouth, where you start turning these carbohydrates into glucose. This is very important because when you start turning carbohydrates into glucose in your mouth, your body is sensing this. Your body does not want a high blood glucose level. So it already gets primed up, ready for you to swallow this, put the glucose in your blood so it can hurry up and get that glucose out of your blood. So as soon as you put carbohydrate in your mouth, you start chewing. Amylase from the saliva gets in there, turns it into glucose. The glucose sends a signal to the body to start producing insulin. So you're already making your insulin levels go up. Okay. Now you swallow this. Remember, with protein and fat, like a big ribeye steak, that stayed in your stomach for around 2 to 4 hours. With carbohydrates, it only stays about 30 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes at the most, depending on what kind of carbohydrates and how many you have. But it doesn't stay in the stomach very long at all. Now, remember, a lot of it's already been turned into glucose. So now, as soon as that carbohydrate, picture a big salad, as soon as you have that carbohydrate, that is in the stomach for 30 to 60 minutes. Then it goes into your intestine. It gets worked on by more amylase that's coming from the pancreas to break that down in more glucose. And immediately, that glucose is taken out of the intestines and shunted straight to the liver through the portal vein. Okay. And that's where the liver starts triaging all this massive amounts of glucose that you're putting in it. There's not a lot of stuff you can do with glucose. And I talked about that back in the episode 90 of Why Do We Eat? But basically, there's 3 things it does. At first, the liver is going to triage that glucose to be used for whatever energy you use right after you eat, which most people just sit down or lay down after they eat, watch TV or whatever. So there's not a lot of activity going on. Then it takes and it refills all its carbohydrate stores, its glucose stores, which is called glycogen. You only have 10% of your liver and 1% of each skeletal muscle. You don't have very much glycogen stores on board at all. And if you eat carbohydrate like most people do, your glycogen stores are not empty. So it doesn't take very much. All the rest of the glucose that you're eating gets turned into triglycerides, turned into fat, and stored in your fat cell. That's what happens to carbohydrates when you eat it. Okay, so that's enough of that. I've gone through this in other podcasts. So we're going back. Now we're back in the intestines again. So first, the carbohydrates were in your mouth. You didn't chew it for very long, and it started breaking down to glucose. Swallowed it, stays in the stomach, not very long, maybe 30 to 60 minutes versus 2 to 4 hours, like with the meat. Then it goes down in the small intestine, gets worked on again. Glucose gets shuttled over to the liver. Okay, so now this is something very important. One, again, it doesn't keep you feeling full at all. But now there's all kinds of other things. One, remember I said that the liver turns most of the carbohydrates that you get eaten, it actually turns that into fat. And if you've listened to my past podcasts, you realize carbohydrates also make your insulin levels go up. And when insulin levels go up, it makes you store your body fat. You cannot burn it for energy. When your insulin levels come down low, that's when you can burn your own subcutaneous fat for energy. And also for all the other things that fat does in the body. Fat does so many things in the body. Glucose is only used for energy. Fat is used for multiple things throughout the body. So remember I talked about when you get full, that's one of the things that happens is your fat cells in your body release leptin. Okay. Remember I said leptin is a hormone that's released from the fat cells. And when it goes to the medial hypothalamus of the brain, it tells your brain, I'm not hungry. However, what they have found out is people who eat carbohydrates all the time, like most people do anymore, thanks to our food companies and drug companies, thanks to them, everybody's eating almost nothing but carbohydrates. So they never stay full. All the carbohydrates getting turned into fat. The fat goes in your storage cells. And now when you have these full fat cells, it starts releasing all this leptin. To where leptin used to stimulate the medial hypothalamus to tell you, I'm not hungry. Now, since people are eating so many carbohydrates, getting turned into so much fat and all that, or triglycerides, And all that fat cells are starting to produce so much leptin that our medial hypothalamus actually becomes resistant to the leptin. It's bombarded so much that the leptin doesn't even work anymore. So that means one of the mechanisms that God gave us for the leptin to make us feel full, we totally negate that. Now it doesn't keep us feeling full anymore. And that's why I've told you there's a common saying that says people are not obese because they eat too much. They eat too much because they're obese. And this is why when you're obese, you're constantly producing leptin and you start making it to where your body is hungry all the time. The other thing with leptin, remember we said when you eat carbohydrates, carbohydrates get turned into glucose. Glucose goes in the blood and causes your insulin levels to rise. They've also found that insulin blocks leptin. So just the fact that you're eating carbohydrates, you're also, again, blocking leptin that your body's producing so it can't stimulate the medial hypothalamus to tell you that you're full. So just the fact that you eat carbohydrates get turned to glucose that raise your insulin levels, that alone also keeps you hungry all the time because you're blocking leptin. So carbohydrates do not stay in your stomach very long at all. They do not stay in your intestines very long at all. Then they get turned into glucose, which raises your insulin levels. And so they get turned into fat, stored as fat. So much fat produces so much leptin that you get resistance in the hypothalamus. And also when you raise your insulin levels, that also blocks leptin. So you're hungry all the time. And it's all because of the type of food that you're eating. Okay. Now, this happens even with God made carbohydrates, real fruit and real vegetables. Okay. The other thing that happens, and we won't talk a lot about it, but there's also the fact of our nucleus accumbens, and that is the pleasure center in our brain. And I've talked about this in the past also. But they've also found that glucose stimulates the pleasure center in the brain the same way that cocaine does. So just like when you take some of those addictive drugs, which glucose, sugar is an addictive drug, when you take this, at first it takes a little bit to stimulate the nucleus accumbens, your pleasure center, so you enjoy that feeling. But the more you eat this, day after day, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, you are making your nucleus accumbens also become resistant to pleasure of sugar. So it takes more and more sugar to get that same pleasure. And they've also found that when you get resistance in the nucleus accumbens, it actually becomes resistant to a lot of pleasures. Okay. So there's all kinds of things wrong with that as well. Now let's look at ultra processed carbs. Okay. They're going to do the same thing, except much, much worse. Because at least with God-made carbs, you're getting a little bit of protein, a little bit of vitamins, and a little bit of minerals. With meat, you're getting all the vitamins, all the minerals, all the fatty acids, all the amino acids. You're getting everything you need in that. With the vegetables, you're not. You're not getting very much protein, not getting a whole lot of vitamins and minerals. You're going to have to eat a lot in order to get it, and you're not getting any fat. However, when you use man-made carbohydrates, everything that's in a box, bottle, bag, can, all the stuff in the middle aisles of the grocery store, all the pastas, rices, all that stuff, all that becomes ultra processed through the drug companies, or I mean the food companies. So all food companies, all their food is made out of three main ingredients: ultra processed carbohydrates, sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and vegetable and seed oils. And these vegetable and seed oils are extremely toxic. So automatically you're putting nothing but sugar in your body when you do this, and that's on purpose. They actually, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit, but they do want you addicted to their food by not having any nutrients in their food. Basically, there's no nutrients in that. You keep your body starving all the time because the more you eat, you're not giving it any more nutrients. You're also eating nothing but carbohydrates, which again does not keep you feeling full at all. And it actually, all of it gets turned into fat and stored as fat. Okay. So all this man-made food is actually horrible for you. Vegetable and seed oils. Remember, we talked about the essential fatty acids, and there are two essential fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6. Okay. You want omega-3 fatty acids get turned into anti-inflammatory prostaglandins, okay, in your body. So it's anti-inflammatory. Omega-6 gets turned into inflammatory prostaglandins. And you need a mixture of both, But you want a mixture of about 1 omega-3 to about 4 to 7 omega-6. And that's what you get when you eat meat. When you eat a good, healthy, marbled meat with that fat, especially if it's from a grass-fed cow, that fat is going to have a good ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 of about 1 to 6 or 7. When you eat the vegetable oils and seed oils that are so toxic, they have so many chemicals. They put it through petrochemical solvents. They have deodorizing chemicals. Then they go even further when in this food where they put artificial coloring, artificial flavoring, artificial sweeteners. It's chemicals, chemicals, chemicals. And all these chemicals are extremely inflammatory to our bodies. Okay, so there's the chemical part that's inflammatory to our bodies. And then there's also this ratio. Remember, I said the ratio of omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory, to omega-6, which is inflammatory. You want that ratio of about 1 omega-3 to about 6 of omega-6. When you have these chemicals, this vegetable and seed oils, they go up to like almost 45 to 50 or even more of omega-6 compared to the omega-3. So it's almost all inflammatory. All of it is inflammatory. So you get an inflammation because of the omega-6s they're in all this ultra processed food. You're also getting all the chemicals that cause inflammation in your body. And then when you're eating sugar is a combination of both glucose and fructose always also gets turned into inflammatory mediators in the body. So when you eat an ultra man-made food, you're bombarding your body with all kinds of inflammation. And that's when you have the sore joints. You have inflammation actually just causes everything. That, again, our body does not like high insulin levels. Our body does not like high glucose levels, and our body does not like inflammation and all these chemicals in our body. So it tries to get rid of it. So that's what happens when you eat carbohydrates. And again, they knew this, and I talked about this when they tried getting everybody addicted to their ultra processed food. And I went all in. I actually did 2 full podcasts on how our carbohydrate addiction is by design. That's podcast episode 66 and 67. So I'm not going to go into it. Just realize that the food companies knew exactly what they're doing when they tried getting us addicted, because they used the 5A model, meaning they had used addictive substances, which they do. They have to make it very available, which they do. It's available. You can get it out of anywhere you look. It's at gas stations, grocery stores, your vending machines everywhere. They're on your conference room tables. You can get this stuff anywhere. Affordability. They're extremely affordable because there's no nutrients in it at all. All it does is keep you being hungry. The other thing, it's affordable because it's nothing but chemicals. So chemicals aren't that expensive. So now you're putting all this chemicals in there that's causing all this inflammation, but it makes it cheap, makes it affordable. And then there's the advertising, which we've talked about. They know how they do the advertising. 75% of all the commercials online are funded by the drug companies. The other 25% of all the commercials, 15% of those are funded by the food companies. They know what they're doing. So they're definitely advertising. They're brainwashing you, making you think that their ultra processed carbohydrates are good and meat and fat is bad. It is a lie. They are doing this for money. That's why they want you to continue to eat their stuff that has no nutrients. And that's why people are starving all the time. And again, the 5th A, so we've talked about added addictive substances, availability, affordability, advertising, and the last A is age. And they know that they're getting this because at least with cigarettes, which you'll know what that means if you listen to my episodes 66 and 67. But at least when they were getting everybody addicted to nicotine and cigarettes, they couldn't advertise to people less than 10 years old. But now when they have this man-made food, we can actually start getting our children as soon as they come out of the womb by giving them infant formula that has these same toxic things. Ultra processed carbohydrates, high fructose corn syrup and sugar, and vegetable and seed oils. It's in that stuff too. And that's why we have an epidemic of 6-month-olds today. So when you eat this stuff, you raise your insulin levels. So you constantly block leptin. You also get insulin resistance because you eat this stuff constantly. So you're keeping your insulin levels high. That's insulin resistance. You add that with the inflammation, and that is type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is not a problem of high blood glucose. That is just a symptom. The problem is having too high insulin for too long causes an insulin resistance. The reason that's important is because all the diabetic medications you take, almost every one of them, the way they work is they lower your glucose by raising your insulin. And that's the last thing you need to do because this is an insulin resistance problem. High insulin is the worst thing you can do to try to get the glucose down. The smartest thing to get your glucose down is quit eating glucose, which means quit eating carbohydrates. If you want to have carbohydrates, just stick to just a little bit of actual vegetables and even less fruit. Totally stay away from the man-made carbohydrates that are in there. So the solution to all this, so you get insulin resistance, leptin resistance, nucleus accumbens resistance, and all this is because of eating carbohydrates all the time. If you just eat meat and fat, you don't have to worry about any of this, and you will stay full. So the solution is not to take a drug, because these drugs, they keep the food in your stomach for extremely long periods of time, to where normally, and we didn't even go into the GLP-1 receptors and all that because I've talked about this in other ones also. But the fact is that when you eat carbohydrates, it doesn't stay in the food and stay in your stomach very long, and it keeps you where you're hungry all the time. The reason why these people are losing weight that are taking these drugs is because it blocks the stomach from emptying into that small intestine. It's trying to do the same thing our body does, where we keep meat in the stomach for long periods of time. The problem is when our body does it, when it actually releases this GLP-1 from our intestines, it only does it in response to a meal. When the meal is over, the GLP-1 comes back down. So your insulin levels come back down, and your food is able to come out of the stomach again. When you use these drugs, they last for weeks at a time. So they found people, they've gone and done surgery on people that they told them to stop eating the night before, and come find out there was food in their stomach from 3 days prior that was still just sitting in their stomach. This is tearing up the stomach. This is tearing up your gut flora. This is tearing up your intestines, everything. This stuff is horrible. And people are losing weight because they're actually malnourished, because they still are not giving themselves the protein and the fat they need. So they're eating these carbohydrates that are horrible for you. Then they're taking a drug that keeps those carbohydrates sitting in your stomach while it ferments, and it starts tearing up all your gut bacteria. And that's why there are over 60 known adverse effects to all these drugs that people are taking to keep food in their stomach. What they're doing is they're making themselves malnourished. Yes, the body is losing weight. It's losing fat because you're not giving an energy source. And mostly they're also losing muscle because you're not giving a protein source. Your body will try to save your organs. And if it needs protein to save your organs, it will steal it from your muscles. And that's why we start getting the muscle weakness. So when you take these drugs, you're eating the muscles off your body. Yes, you're eating the fat off your body, but that's because you're not giving any of the nutrients that it needs. You're not actually giving it the fat. So these people are going through actually malnourished, just like you used to see with type 1 diabetics. They also was able to do nothing but eat the fat out of their bodies until there was no fat left. And once there was no fat left, that's when these type 1 diabetics were dying, because they had no other source. And that's basically what we're doing by giving these drugs to somebody. So the answer is, you do not use a drug that keeps food, even if it's non-nutritive, keep the food in the stomach for days at a time, has its multiple adverse effects, all the way from thyroid C-cell tumors to medullary carcinomas, also in the thyroid, multiple GI effects, multiple cardiovascular effects, having liver damage, kidney damage. There's all kinds of things that are happening from these drugs, only because people want to keep eating these horrible carbohydrates and then try to keep that food in your stomach, when really you can bypass all this by giving your body the nutrients it needs, fat and meat, that will stay in your stomach, stay in your intestines, keep you feeling full, give your body all the nutrients so your body won't be getting hungry all the time. So I know that's a lot of information. I know I kept going over and over and over things because I really want people to understand. If you are on one of these drugs and you want to stay on these drugs, the only way these are going to work is if you use these drugs for just a short, like a month, in order to get over your hump of switching your body from being a carbohydrate burner over to being a fat burner. And all that really is going to take is learning how to quit eating carbohydrates, mainly eat meat, which also goes to meat, Greek yogurt, eggs, um, full fat dairy, which full fat cottage cheese, all that. Those are good protein sources, good fat sources that will keep you feeling full and give your body all the nutrients that it needs. So I I'm gonna quit talking now because I keep saying the same thing over and over again, but it really is. It's the same thing over and over again, just in different ways because you don't know how people are going to take it. So for now, if you're on one of these medications, please try to change the type of food you eat, or you will be on these medications forever. When you come off, you are going to swell up a lot more. And hopefully, you don't have some of these multiple, over 60 serious side effects that these drugs are causing. So eat healthy and enjoy life. So, once again, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week. And remember, as always, make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life.